Silas Boone had tied everything he owned behind his saddle before sunrise. One bedroll, 2 shirts, a shaving tin, a worn Bible with no family names written inside, a small pouch of coins. That was all a man needed when he had spent most of his life leaving places before anyone could ask him to stay. The morning wind moved cold across the yard of Willow Creek Ranch. Dust slid under the stable doors. A lantern still burned beside the porch, its flame leaning hard inside the glass. The sky over northern Montana was pale blue at the edges, but the mountains were still dark, like they were keeping secrets of their own. Silas tightened the last strap on his saddlebag and kept his eyes on the leather. Behind him, the front door opened. He knew the sound before he turned. He knew the slow step on the porch boards. He knew the quiet pause that came after, the kind of pause that belonged to a woman trying not to let her heart show on her face. Evelyn Hart stood at the top of the steps with a shawl pulled around her shoulders. Her brown hair was pinned badly, as if she had dressed in a hurry and had not cared whether any strand obeyed her. In one hand, she held a folded envelope yellowed by time. Silas saw the envelope before he saw her eyes. "You were truly going to ride off without another word," she said. His hand rested on the saddle horn. "I said my piece last night." "No," Evelyn said softly. "You said what was easiest for you to say." A horse shifted in the barn behind him. Somewhere near the chicken coop, a gate knocked once in the wind. Silas swallowed. "Evelyn, I have a long ride." "That is what you always have," she said. "A long ride, a reason to go, a town waiting somewhere else, a road that asks nothing from you." He looked away, because the truth in her voice cut deeper than anger would have. For 3 years, Willow Creek had been the nearest thing to a home Silas Boone had ever known. He had arrived with dust in his coat, hunger in his belly, and a look in his eyes that told old men he had seen enough loss to keep quiet about it. He had meant to stay 1 season, just long enough to earn honest wages, repair his boots, and move on before the first heavy snow. That was how he lived. Never too long in one town. Never too close to one hearth, never close enough for a woman's kindness to become something a man could not survive losing. But Willow Creek had not let him pass through easy. The ranch had belonged then to Jonah Hart, Evelyn's father. Jonah was a narrow-shouldered man with a white beard, sharp eyes, and hands bent from years of rope, rains, and winter. He raised cattle, trained horses, and trusted silence more than talk. On Silas's first day, Jonah watched him calm a young buckskin that had thrown 2 riders and cracked a fence rail. Silas did not shout at the animal. He did not curse. He stood in the round pen with his hat low and his hand out, waiting until the horse stopped fighting shadows. After nearly an hour, the buckskin lowered its head. Jonah had leaned on the fence and said, "A man who knows when not to force a creature is worth more than one who thinks strength is all noise." Silas had only nodded. That evening, Jonah offered him work through the season. By winter, he offered him a place at the supper table. By spring, he spoke to him like a son, though neither man would have used such a word out loud. Evelyn back then had not trusted Silas at first. She was 29, steady-eyed and strong in the way frontier women learn to be strong, not because they wanted praise for it, but because the stove still needed wood, the books still needed balancing, and sick calves did not wait for grief to pass. She had seen men come through Willow Creek before. Some worked hard, some lied well, some smiled at lonely women and left trouble in their wake. Silas did none of that. He kept to himself. He rose before dawn. He mended what was broken before anyone asked. He spoke gently to frightened horses and hardly at all to people. If he borrowed a tool, he brought it back cleaner than he found it. If he saw Evelyn carrying too much, he took half the load without making a show of it. That quiet way of his troubled her more than charm would have. A charming man was easy to doubt. A quiet good man was dangerous, because a heart could start trusting him before the mind gave permission. Then Jonah Hart died in the late winter of Silas's first year. It happened after 3 days of bitter cold. The creek froze white at the edges. Snow pressed against the barn like flour. Jonah had gone to bed coughing and had not risen when the morning coffee boiled. Evelyn found him. Silas was the one who heard her cry from the house. He remembered that sound now as he stood beside his saddled horse 3 years later, not because it had been loud, but because it had been small. A broken sound. The sound of a woman who had held herself upright her whole life and for one breath could not. After the funeral, Willow Creek changed. The ranch passed to Evelyn, along with the cattle, the horses, the house, the winter hay, and a banknote she had not known existed. Jonah had borrowed against the land years earlier after a dry summer and a sickness that took near a quarter of the herd. He had kept paying what he could, kept smiling when Evelyn asked after the books, kept the fear folded away where fathers sometimes keep their pain. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table the night she found the papers. Her father's account ledger lay open before her. The lamp smoked. Her hands trembled, though she pressed them flat against the wood to stop it. "He let me believe we were safe," she whispered. Silas stood across from her, hat in hand. "Maybe he wanted you to have one less fear while he was living." "That does not make the debt smaller." "No," Silas said, "it does not." She looked up at him then, eyes red but dry. "You are free to leave. I cannot promise steady wages with this hanging over us." He remembered his answer. He had said it without dressing it up. "I did not ask for steady, I asked for honest." Evelyn stared at him a long moment. Then she nodded once, and from that night forward he stayed. The first year after Jonah's death nearly broke them both. The fences gave way in spring mud. 2 cows died birthing. A buyer from Helena tried to cheat Evelyn on a horse sale until Silas stepped close enough to make the man remember his manners. The roof leaked over the pantry. The bank sent letters in a cold clerk's hand. But Evelyn did not fold. She sold 3 trained horses for more than anyone in town thought she could get. She learned to read the market better than men who laughed behind their hands at a woman running a ranch. She cut expenses without cutting dignity. She could sit across from a banker in her plain blue dress and make him feel, somehow, that he was the one asking for favor. Silas watched her through it all with a feeling he did not name. He watched her kneel in the barn beside a sick foal, whispering to it as if kindness itself could keep it breathing. He watched her stand alone by Jonah's grave with one hand resting on the fence post, saying nothing while the wind pulled at her skirt. He watched her give the last biscuit at supper to a hungry young ranch hand and pretend she was not hungry herself. Little by little, Willow Creek became more than work. It became the smell of coffee before dawn. It became Evelyn's voice calling from the porch that breakfast was getting cold. It became 2 tin cups set side by side on the rail fence each morning while they checked the horses. It became the way she said his name when she was tired. Silas. Not Mr. Boone, not Cowboy, not hired hand. Silas. And that was the trouble. A man could leave a job, he could leave a town, he could leave a bunkhouse without looking back. But leaving a voice was harder. Still, he had decided to go. The decision had come after Nathaniel Cross arrived from Helena. Cross wore polished boots that had never seen manure, a black coat cut fine, and a smile smooth enough to hide a knife behind it. He owned cattle land west of the Missouri and money enough to make bank managers stand when he entered a room. He came first to discuss buying stock. Then he came to discuss investing in Willow Creek. Then he came often enough that everyone in town began watching Evelyn with questions in their eyes. Cross never said plainly that marriage was part of his offer. He did not have to. A woman alone should not have to fight a bank, Cross told Evelyn one afternoon in the yard, loud enough for Silas to hear from the water trough. With the proper arrangement, Willow Creek could be secure before winter. Evelyn's face stayed calm. Security can cost more than debt if a person is not careful. Cross smiled, only if one chooses pride over sense. Silas had looked down at the bucket in his hands and felt something inside him turn to stone. That night he accepted an offer from a ranch near Fort Benton. Better pay, a manager's position, a cabin of his own, respectable work. It was everything a drifting man should have wanted. It was also far enough away that he would not have to stand by and watch Evelyn Hart choose another man. He told himself he was doing the right thing. He told himself she needed someone with money, standing, and a future shaped better than his own. He told himself that a woman fighting to save her father's land did not need the burden of a middle-aged cowboy with scars in his heart and nothing fine to offer but calloused hands. He did not ask her what she wanted. That was his cowardice. And now, in the gray light of morning, Evelyn stood before him holding a letter he had never seen. The wind pressed her shawl against her dress. Her fingers tightened on the envelope. "My father wrote this before he died," she said. Silas went still. Evelyn stepped down from the porch. "It was not addressed to me." The word struck him harder than he expected. Who was it addressed to? She came closer and held out the envelope. "To you." Silas did not take it at first. For one strange second, he looked toward the road, as if the road might save him from what was standing right in front of him. But the road was empty. The whole world seemed to be holding its breath. At last he reached for the letter. His thumb brushed Evelyn's fingers when he took it, and that small touch nearly undid the both of them. The envelope was soft with age. His name was written across the front in Jonah Hart's square, careful hand. Silas Boone. He stared at the name until the letters blurred. "Why do you have this?" he asked. Evelyn's eyes filled, but her voice stayed low. "Because I found it after the funeral." "After the funeral," he repeated. "Yes. That was 2 years ago." "I know." He looked at her then, and she did not look away. The hurt came slow across his face, not anger first, hurt, the kind a man cannot hide because it surprises him. "You kept a dead man's letter from me for 2 years." Evelyn pressed one hand to her middle, as though something inside her had shifted loose. "Yes." "Why?" She opened her mouth, but no answer came. The horse beside them stamped once, restless under the weight of packed saddlebags. A line of sunlight touched the barn roof. Somewhere in the house, the kitchen clock struck the hour. Silas turned the envelope over. The seal had already been broken. He noticed that too. "You read it," he said. Evelyn closed her eyes for one breath. "Yes." He nodded once, but there was no peace in it. The letter shook slightly in his hand. He hated that she could see it. He hated more that he could not stop it. "What did Jonah want to say to me that you could not bear for me to hear?" Evelyn's lips parted. But before she could answer, a rider appeared on the ridge beyond the cottonwoods, moving fast toward Willow Creek. The horse came hard through the morning dust, and Silas turned at the sound. Evelyn turned too. Even from a distance, Silas recognized the black coat. Nathaniel Cross was coming. And whatever truth had waited inside that old envelope for 2 silent years, it had chosen the very worst morning to rise from the grave. Nathaniel Cross rode into the yard as if the land already belonged to him. His black horse was lathered at the neck, and the animal tossed its head against the bit, unhappy from being pushed too hard over frozen morning ground. Cross drew up near the porch, took one look at Silas's packed horse, then at the old letter in Silas's hand, and smiled like a man who had found a weakness. Well, Cross said, brushing dust from one sleeve, I see I arrived at an interesting hour. No one answered him at first. Evelyn stood with her shawl tight around her shoulders, her face pale but steady. Silas held Jonah Hart's letter without opening it, the yellow paper feeling heavier than iron in his hand. Cross swung down from the saddle. Miss Hart, I came to speak with you before town business caught up with the day, but it appears Mr. Boone is finally taking the road. Silas looked at him. This is private. Cross gave a soft laugh. A hired man's departure from a ranch under serious debt is not private, Mr. Boone. Not when that departure may affect the value of what I have offered to save. Evelyn's eyes sharpened. You offered to buy what grief made vulnerable. That is not the same as saving it. Something hard moved behind Cross's smile, but he covered it quickly. You are emotional this morning. Understandable. A woman in your position has much to consider. Silas folded his fingers around the letter. She asked you to leave. She did no such thing. I am asking now, Evelyn said. Cross looked from her to Silas. For a moment, the yard went quiet except for the barn rope tapping against the post in the wind. Then Cross stepped closer, lowering his voice in a way meant to sound kind but only made it colder. You may wish to think before speaking so firmly, he said. The bank in Helena will not wait forever, neither will I. Evelyn lifted her chin. Then do not wait. The word struck clean. Silas saw it. Cross had expected fear, maybe hesitation, maybe that small, helpless silence men like him mistook for consent. Instead, Evelyn gave him neither. Cross's gaze dropped to the envelope in Silas's hand. What is that? Silas slid the letter into the inside pocket of his coat. None of your concern. Cross's eyes narrowed. Anything written by Jonah Hart concerning this ranch may very well become my concern. Evelyn took one step forward. My father's words do not belong to you. No, Cross said, but debts have a way of giving strangers rights where family sentiment fails. The color rose in Evelyn's face, but she did not speak. Silas knew she was holding back because anger, once loose, might show more hurt than she wanted Cross to see. So Silas spoke for her. You heard the lady. Cross studied him with open dislike now. Careful, Boone. A man with no property, no name worth carrying, and no place to go should be slower to make enemies. Silas felt the old familiar shame reach for him. It was a shame he had carried so long it almost felt like part of his bones. No property, no family, no roots. Men like Cross had a way of saying those truths as if they were proof that a man's heart was worth less. But Evelyn's hand moved. Just slightly. Her fingers brushed the side of his sleeve. It was not enough for Cross to notice. It was barely enough for Silas to feel, but he did feel it. A small kindness, a quiet answer, a woman saying without words that Cross did not get to name him. Silas stood straighter. I have enemies enough, he said. One more will not crowd the list. Cross gave a thin smile. Then I will leave you to your touching farewell. He turned to Evelyn. I will be in town until noon. If you regain your sense before then, you know where to find me. I will not, Evelyn said. Cross mounted again, but before riding off, he looked back at Silas. Open old letters carefully, Boone. Dead men have a habit of making promises the living cannot afford. Then he rode out, leaving a long ribbon of dust behind him. For a while, neither Silas nor Evelyn moved. The sound of Cross's horse faded toward the ridge. A rooster called from behind the stable, late and foolish, as if morning had only just begun. Evelyn let out a breath she must have been holding since Cross arrived. Silas looked toward the road. He is not finished. No, she said. Men like that do not leave just because truth offends them. Has he threatened you before? Evelyn looked down. That was answer enough. Silas's jaw tightened. Evelyn. It was never plain enough to carry to the sheriff, she said. A word outside the mercantile, a warning dressed as advice, a reminder of what the bank could do if the note was called early. Why did you not tell me? She gave him a sad look. Are we truly going to begin counting all the things we failed to tell each other? The question struck harder than anger. Silas turned away from her and looked at his saddled horse. The animal stood ready, head low, reins hanging loose, waiting for a rider who suddenly seemed far less certain than he had before sunrise. Evelyn's voice softened. Read it. His hand went to the pocket of his coat. I do not know if I want to. My father wanted you to. That did not trouble you for 2 years. Pain crossed her face, quick and honest. It troubled me every day. Not enough. No, she whispered, not enough. Silas looked at her then, and the hurt between them changed shape. It was still there, but beneath it he saw fear. Not the fear of Cross, not the fear of the bank, something older, something that had lived in her quietly, the same way his leaving had lived in him. He pulled the envelope from his coat. The paper gave a dry sound as he unfolded it. Jonah's handwriting filled the page, straight and careful, just as it had been on feed orders, breeding records, and the little notes he used to leave beside broken tools. Silas read the first line, then stopped breathing for a moment. Evelyn watched his face, and though she had read the letter before, seeing him read it felt worse. It felt like standing trial before both the living and the dead. Silas read in silence. Jonah Hart had written that he knew his strength was failing. He had written that he was not afraid of death, only of leaving Evelyn with too much weight on her shoulders, and no one beside her who understood the land, the horses, and the kind of stubborn courage it took to keep both alive. Then the words became harder. Jonah had written that Silas Boone was not merely hired help. He was the first man in many years Jonah had trusted to care for Willow Creek without greed in his hands. He had meant, if time allowed, to offer Silas a legal share of the ranch, not as charity and not as wages, but as partnership earned by loyalty. Silas's throat worked. He read on. Evelyn looked away when he reached the final part. She knew the lines. She had carried them like a coal in her chest. Jonah had written that his daughter loved Silas, though she was too proud and too frightened to say it. He had written that Silas looked at Evelyn the same way when he believed no one was watching. And then came the last line. Do not let silence steal what love has already given you both. Silas lowered the paper. The yard seemed different now. The barn, the porch, the mountains, the saddled horse, everything looked the same, yet nothing was where it had been a moment before. Evelyn's eyes shone. Say something. Silas looked at the letter again, then at her. You let me stand beside you for 2 years, he said slowly, thinking I was only a hired man. Her mouth trembled. No, I never thought of you as only that. But you let me think it. Yes. Why? She wrapped both arms around herself, but this time not from cold. Because if I gave you that letter, I thought you might stay out of duty to him, out of pity for me, out of some promise you never made, and I could not bear to spend my life wondering whether you were here because you loved this place or because a dying man asked you to be. Silas stared at her. And because, she added, voice breaking, if you read it and still left, I would have no lie left to hide behind. The wind moved between them. Silas looked toward the road again. Cross was gone. The day had opened. His horse was saddled. A job waited far north. A simple life waited too, if simple meant lonely. He folded Jonah's letter with care. Then he looked at Evelyn, and for the first time that morning his voice lost its hardness. There is more than one secret in this yard, he said. Evelyn blinked. Silas stepped back toward his horse, but not to mount. He reached into the saddlebag and pulled out a small wooden box, dark with age and tied shut with a strip of leather. Evelyn had never seen it before. Silas held it in both hands like it might break. "I suppose," he said quietly, "I have been carrying one too." Yes. Evelyn looked at the wooden box in Silas's hands as if it had made a sound. It was no bigger than a prayer book, with one corner chipped and the leather tie worn soft from years of handling. The lid had been polished by fingers more than by care. Whatever was inside, Silas had carried it long enough that the box seemed less like luggage and more like a wound he had learned to hide. "What is it?" she asked. Silas did not answer right away. He glanced toward the barn, then toward the road where Nathaniel Cross had disappeared. For the first time since Evelyn had known him, Silas looked truly uncertain. Not tired, not guarded. Uncertain, like a man standing at the edge of a river he had crossed in dreams but never in daylight. "It is the reason I got so good at leaving," he said. Evelyn's anger softened, but it did not vanish. "You never told me there was a reason." "I never told anybody." He sat the box on the top rail of the hitching post. His fingers worked at the leather tie, but stopped before opening it. The morning sun had begun to warm the yard. Frost melted along the wagon wheel ruts. A drop of water fell from the pump handle and struck the ground with a small dark mark. Inside the stable, a horse blew softly through its nose. Silas looked at Jonah's letter, still held carefully in his other hand. "Your father saw more than I wanted him to," he said. "Maybe more than I was ready to see myself. He had a way of doing that." "He did." Silas gave a faint smile, but it faded quickly. Then he opened the box. Inside lay a woman's blue hair ribbon, a small tintype wrapped in cloth, and a folded paper so old the edges had split. Evelyn did not step closer, though every part of her wanted to. Something in Silas's face told her this was not a thing to reach for without being invited. "My mother wore that ribbon," he said. Evelyn looked at the faded blue strip. "You said once you did not remember her." "I do not remember her face proper." He touched the tintype but did not lift it. "I remember the ribbon, foolish thing maybe. A child remembers what he can." The words were simple, but the pain beneath them was not. Silas lifted the tintype and turned it toward her. A young woman stared back from the old image, stiff-backed, pretty in a sad way, with light eyes and one hand resting on the shoulder of a little boy. The boy could not have been more than 5. His hair was combed flat, his boots too large, his expression solemn. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. "That was you." Silas nodded. "She left 3 weeks after that picture was taken." Evelyn looked up at him. He kept his eyes on the box. "My father said she had no taste for poor living. Said she wanted a town dress, clean hands, music on Saturday nights, and a man who could give more than beans, dust, and promises. Maybe that was true. Maybe it was only the story he told because the truth hurt worse." "What truth?" Silas let out a slow breath. That she was tired, that life had ground her down, that maybe she left because staying felt like dying little by little. Evelyn said nothing. The judgment she might have expected to feel did not come. Life in the West could turn good people hard and tired people desperate. She knew enough grief not to sit high above another woman's choice from years ago. "My father never forgave her," Silas said, "and he never forgave me for looking like her when he drank." Evelyn's hand moved to her mouth. Silas saw it and shook his head. He was not cruel every day. That almost made it harder. Some mornings he would put me on the wagon seat beside him and teach me the names of birds. Other nights he would look at me like I was proof somebody had left him. The wind shifted. Dust crawled along Silas's boot. "When I was 16, he took work driving freight. Hard road, bad pay. He coughed through that whole winter and would not stop. By spring, they buried him outside Miles City with 6 other men who had no family close enough to send word to. "You were alone," Evelyn whispered. "I had been practicing for it." The answer broke something quiet in her. Silas folded the cloth back over the tintype. "After that, I learned the trick. Leave before you need anyone. Leave before a woman can look at you one morning and decide the life beside you is too poor, too narrow, too hard. Leave before a man can call you son and die before you figure out how to answer him." Evelyn looked toward Jonah's letter. "And my father." Silas's jaw worked once. He nearly ruined the trick. A small laugh escaped her, sad and soft. Silas looked at the house. "He asked me once why I never unpacked proper. I told him a man with little to his name has little to put away. He said that was not an answer. Said a bedroll left tied was not a sign of poverty, but a sign of fear." "That sounds like him." "I was angry when he said it." Silas closed the box, mostly because he was right. For a moment, Evelyn wanted to tell him everything would be all right. But that would have been too easy and not fully honest. Some hurts did not disappear because love finally found a voice. Some hurts had to be carried differently, with someone walking beside them. She reached for the box only after Silas looked at her and gave the smallest nod. Her fingers rested on the lid. "Why show me now?" "Because you showed me the letter." That was not courage, that was desperation. Sometimes that is what courage looks like when it comes late. Evelyn lowered her eyes. "Then we are both late." "Yes," Silas said, "but not gone." Those 3 words settled between them. "Not gone." Evelyn looked at his saddled horse. The bedroll still waited behind the cantle. The reins still hung ready. The road still stretched north. Nothing had changed except everything. She wanted to ask him to stay. The words rose to her lips, plain and trembling. "Stay. Stay because I love you. Stay because this place is not whole when you are gone. Stay because I am tired of being brave in rooms where no one sees me shaking." But fear caught the words before they could leave her. For 2 years she had told herself silence was patience. She had told herself that love, if it was real, should come without asking. Now she saw how pride had dressed itself as dignity, how fear had sounded almost noble when she gave it enough time. Silas picked up Jonah's letter again. "Your father asked me not to let silence steal what love had given us." Evelyn's breath caught. Silas looked at her, and there was no hiding left in his face. "I do not know how to be the kind of man who stays without flinching. I do not know how to believe easy that a woman would choose a life with me and not wake one day feeling trapped by it." Evelyn stepped closer. "I cannot promise never to be afraid," he said, "but I can tell you the truth this morning." "What truth?" His voice roughened. "I did not accept that job because I wanted the work. I accepted it because watching Nathaniel Cross offer you security made me feel like every poor thing I ever feared about myself was true." Evelyn's eyes filled again. Silas continued, each word pulled from somewhere deep. "I was leaving because I love you, and because I was too much a coward to stand here and find out whether you loved me back." A stillness fell over the yard. Then a second rider came into view beyond the pasture fence, not from the main road this time, but from the lower trail that led toward town. It was young Thomas Reed, one of the ranch hands, riding fast with his hat pressed low against the wind. He pulled up hard near the gate, face flushed. "Miss Hart," he called, "Mr. Boone, you both need to come to town." Evelyn turned. "What happened?" Thomas looked from her to Silas, then swallowed. "Mr. Cross is at the bank," he said, "and he is telling folks he has proof Willow Creek cannot pay its note." Silas slipped Jonah's letter inside his coat. Evelyn's fear vanished beneath something steadier. "Then I suppose," she said, "it is time we stop letting men speak for us." The ride to town felt shorter than it ever had before. Evelyn rode ahead with her coat buttoned tight and her hat tied down against the wind. Silas kept beside her, not in front, not behind. Beside her. That small difference did not escape either of them. Thomas Reed followed a few lengths back, still breathing hard from his earlier ride. The boy was barely 20, with hands too large for his wrists, and a good heart he tried to hide under careless talk. He had seen enough of ranch trouble to know when joking would not help. The road from Willow Creek to Mercy Crossing ran along the creek bed, past cottonwoods, gray grass, and old wagon ruts cut deep by years of weather. Morning light lay flat across the land. A hawk circled above the ridge. The whole valley looked peaceful in that hard frontier way, as if it had no patience for human sorrow and would keep turning gold and brown no matter who broke under it. Evelyn rode with Jonah's old ledger, wrapped in cloth inside her saddlebag. Silas had asked no questions when she went back into the house for it. He only waited by the gate, holding his horse steady while she fastened the bag. The old letter was still inside his coat. The wooden box had been put back into his saddlebag, but something of it remained between them now, not as a secret but as an open door. Halfway to town, Evelyn spoke without looking at him. "You meant what you said." Silas looked over, about cross. "No." He understood then. The reins shifted in his hands. "Yes." The simple answer warmed her more than it should have, and frightened her too. Love spoken plainly did not erase debt, pride, bank papers, or a man like Nathaniel Cross waiting in town with his polished smile and quiet threats. But it changed the ground beneath those troubles. For 2 years she had wanted to hear Silas say he loved her. Now that he had, she did not know where to put the words inside herself. They seemed too large for the morning. "I did too," she said. Silas turned his head. Evelyn kept her eyes on the road. "Love you." The words came out small, almost stern, as if she were giving an account of cattle sold. But Silas heard the tremble beneath them. He heard the years in them. He heard every supper, every cup of coffee, every silence by the barn. His hand tightened on the reins. He wanted to answer with something fine, something worth the years they had wasted. But the only words that came were plain. "I know." Evelyn glanced at him then, one eyebrow lifting despite everything. "That is your answer." A corner of his mouth moved. "No, that is the foolish part that spoke first." She almost smiled. He took a breath. "I love you, Evelyn Hart. I have loved you long enough to be ashamed of how hard I tried not to." The smile faded from her face, but not because the words displeased her. Dusk gathered on the hem of her riding skirt. The wind tugged one loose strand of hair against her cheek. She nodded once, not trusting herself with more. Behind them, Thomas cleared his throat loudly. "I can ride farther back if this is private," he called. Evelyn looked straight ahead. "Ride any farther back, Thomas, and you will be in yesterday." Silas gave a low laugh. Thomas grinned despite the worry in his face, and for one short stretch of road, the fear around them loosened. Mercy Crossing appeared just before noon, sitting low between 2 ridges with its church steeple, feed store, bank, blacksmith, and a line of hitching posts already crowded with horses. Word had spread. That was plain from the moment they reached the edge of town. Men stood outside the mercantile pretending to discuss flour prices while watching the road. Women lingered near the church steps with baskets over their arms and sharp concern in their eyes. Old Mr. Bell, who ran the livery, stopped brushing a sorrel and stared openly. The whole town knew something was happening at the bank. Evelyn hated that, not because she feared being seen, but because pride was a stubborn thing. Her father had walked these same boards, bought nails from these same shelves, shaken hands with these same men. She did not want Jonah Hart's name turned into noon gossip. Silas seemed to sense it. He leaned closer as they slowed their horses. "Hold your head how you please," he said. "Your father never looked small a day in his life, and neither do you." Evelyn swallowed. They tied their horses outside the bank. The bank building was narrow, painted white, with green shutters and a brass sign polished brighter than anything else on the street. Inside, voices carried. One belonged to Nathaniel Cross, smooth, patient, practiced. The other belonged to Mr. Amos Whitcomb, the bank manager, a nervous man with spectacles and a habit of clearing his throat when money turned unfriendly. Evelyn stepped onto the boardwalk. Silas reached for the door, but she put a hand on his arm. "I need to speak first." He nodded and let his hand fall away. That too changed something. Inside the bank, the air smelled of ink, paper, stove coal, and damp wool. Cross stood near the manager's desk with his gloves in one hand. Mr. Whitcomb sat behind the desk, shuffling papers he had no need to shuffle. Two town men stood near the wall as if they had simply wandered in, though Evelyn knew better. Cross liked witnesses when he thought they made him look powerful. Cross turned as she entered. "Miss Hart," he said. "Mr. Boone, how fortunate. I had hoped to spare you embarrassment, but perhaps direct discussion is better." Evelyn walked to the desk, "Then speak directly." Mr. Whitcomb cleared his throat. "Miss Hart, this matter is delicate." "Debt rarely feels delicate to the person carrying it," she said. Silas stood by the door, hat in hand. He said nothing. His silence was not absence this time. It was support, steady as a fence post. Cross laid a paper on the desk. "I have reason to believe Willow Creek Ranch cannot meet the next payment. Under the terms of the bank note, if confidence is reasonably shaken, the bank may review the loan and seek early settlement." Evelyn looked at the paper but did not touch it. "You have reason." Cross smiled. "Market conditions, low herd numbers, repair costs, your own lack of capital." "My lack of capital is not a number on that page. It is your opinion." "It is an informed one." "No," she said, "it is a useful one for you." One of the men near the wall shifted. Mr. Whitcomb wiped his spectacles. "Miss Hart, Mr. Cross has expressed willingness to assume the note in exchange for an interest in the property. From a banking standpoint, it is not an unreasonable solution." "To whom?" Evelyn asked. Whitcomb blinked. "Pardon." "Not unreasonable to whom? To the bank, to Mr. Cross, or to the woman expected to surrender land because men in clean coats grew nervous before asking what she had already paid?" Her voice did not rise, but it filled the room. Cross's smile thinned. "Strong words do not pay notes." "No," Evelyn said, "horses do." She untied the cloth from her ledger and placed it on the desk. Mr. Whitcomb leaned forward. Evelyn opened the book to the marked pages. Her handwriting filled them in clean columns. Sales, buyers, deposits, breeding fees, training fees, payments made, payments due, every dollar accounted for in ink, not hope. "I have sold 8 trained horses since spring," she said. 3 more are contracted to Colonel Weber near Deer Lodge. The deposit has already cleared through this bank, though perhaps you failed to mention that, Mr. Whitcomb." The bank manager's face reddened. Cross looked at him sharply. Evelyn turned a page. "The next payment is not only ready, it is early." She reached into her coat and set a folded bank draft on the desk. The room went quiet. Silas felt a slow pride rise in his chest, fierce and humbling. He had known Evelyn was capable. He had not known she had been carrying this much alone, not because she was weak, but because she had been too practiced at being strong in secret. Mr. Whitcomb picked up the draft, examined it, and cleared his throat twice. "This appears to be in order." Cross stepped forward. "One payment does not settle the debt." "No," Evelyn said, "but it settles your claim that I cannot meet it." "It does not settle the winter." "I will settle the winter when it comes." Cross's face hardened. You are making a mistake. Evelyn closed the ledger. I have made mistakes, Mr. Cross. Refusing you is not one of them. For the first time, Cross had no quick answer. Then the bank door opened behind Silas, and Mrs. Abigail Prout from the mercantile stepped in, carrying a basket of folded cloth like a shield. Forgive me, she said, though her tone made clear she was not asking forgiveness from anyone. I was passing and heard raised voices. No voices were raised, Cross said. Then your pride must be louder than your mouth, Mrs. Prout replied. One of the men near the wall coughed into his fist. Mrs. Prout looked at Evelyn, her sharp face softened. Your father bought coffee for me every Thursday for 21 years, paid late twice, apologized both times, and once fixed my porch rail without letting me pay him. I do not know much about bank language, Mr. Whitcomb, but I know Jonah Hart's daughter is not careless. Mr. Whitcomb looked deeply uncomfortable. No one suggested careless. I heard enough to smell it. Evelyn's eyes stung unexpectedly. More footsteps sounded outside. Old Mr. Bell appeared in the doorway, hat pressed to his chest. Behind him stood the blacksmith, the schoolteacher, and Thomas Reed, who looked both nervous and proud to have helped gather half the town without being asked. Mr. Bell spoke slowly. Miss Hart pays her way, hires fair, keeps good stock. If this town is weighing character today, I reckon hers balances better than most. Cross's face darkened. This is not a church meeting. No, Silas said at last. It is a bank, which makes it a poor place for a man to dress greed up as concern. Every head turned toward him. Cross's eyes flashed. You would do well to remember your position. Silas stepped forward. I am remembering it clearer by the minute. Evelyn looked at him. He took Jonah's letter from his coat, but did not unfold it yet. I was hired at Willow Creek, Silas said. That is true, but Jonah Hart meant for me to be more than hired. Cross scoffed. A dead man's sentiment again. A dead man's written intent, Silas said. Mr. Whitcomb looked up quickly. Evelyn touched Silas's sleeve, not to stop him, but because she knew what this cost him. Silas laid the letter beside the ledger. Jonah Hart wrote that he trusted me with Willow Creek. He wrote that he meant to offer me a share as partner. I do not claim that as legal right. Not yet. But I claim this much in front of everyone standing here. I am not leaving today. Evelyn stopped breathing. Silas looked at her, then back at the room. And if Miss Hart will have me stand beside her, I will do so openly, not as a shadow, not as a man half-packed for the next road, as someone willing to earn his place. Mrs. Prout's hand went to her heart. Thomas grinned so wide he nearly forgot to look solemn. Cross laughed once, sharp and ugly. How touching, a ranch saved by romance in a letter. No, Evelyn said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. She stood beside Silas. A ranch saved by work, she said. By truth. By horses trained through winter when men with money were still asleep in town. By neighbors who know the difference between help and ownership. And by finally saying plainly what should have been said long ago. She turned to Mr. Whitcomb. Apply the payment. The bank manager hesitated only a second before nodding. Cross stared at them all, his face no longer smooth. Something had slipped, something small but dangerous. This town may enjoy a sentimental display, he said, pulling on his gloves, but sentiment will not stop consequences. He walked to the door. Silas did not move aside right away. For one breath, the two men stood nearly shoulder to shoulder. Cross's polished coat against Silas's trail-worn one, wealth against work, possession against patience. Then Silas stepped aside. Not because he feared him. Because Evelyn had already won this room without a single shove. Cross left the bank and mounted his horse in the street. Through the window, They watched him yank the reins hard enough to make the animal toss its head. Mrs. Prout frowned. A man who handles a horse that way tells you enough about how he handles everything else. Evelyn looked down at Jonah's letter beside the ledger. The victory in the room should have felt complete. It did not. Silas saw her face. What is it? She touched the edge of the letter. There is something I never told you about the day Father died. The room around them seemed to fall away. Silas's voice lowered. What? Evelyn looked toward the window, where Cross was disappearing down the street. My father had one visitor the week before his final illness, she said. I was never certain it mattered. Silas already knew the answer before she spoke it. Evelyn turned back to him. It was Nathaniel Cross. Yes. Silas did not speak at first. The name Nathaniel Cross seemed to remain in the bank long after Evelyn said it. It hung above the desk, above Jonah's letter, above the ledger, above every neighbor who had gathered with good intentions and now stood too quiet to pretend they had not heard. Mr. Whitcomb lowered the bank draft slowly. Mrs. Prout's hand tightened around the handle of her basket. Thomas Reed stopped smiling. Even the stove in the corner seemed to burn softer. Silas looked at Evelyn. Cross came to see Jonah before he died. Yes. When? 6 days before Father took to bed. Silas's face changed, not with anger alone, with memory. He could see that week again. Jonah sitting longer by the fire. Jonah waving off help with chores he had handled alone for 30 years. Jonah saying the cold had gotten into his chest and he only needed rest. At the time, grief had made those days blur. Now each small piece began to sharpen. What did Cross want? Silas asked. Evelyn folded her fingers together. Land. Willow Creek. Not all of it, not then. He asked about buying the south pasture. Mr. Bell, standing near the door, made a low sound. South pasture has the creek bend. And the best winter grass, Silas said. Evelyn nodded. Father refused him. Mrs. Prout stepped closer. Jonah told you this. Not at first, Evelyn said. I heard raised voices in the parlor. Father sent me to the barn to check on a mare that did not need checking. When I came back, Mr. Cross was leaving. He had that same pleasant smile he wears when he means to insult a person politely. A few townsfolk shifted. They knew that smile. What did Jonah say after? Silas asked. Evelyn looked down at the ledger. He said some men do not want land because they love it. They want it because someone else will not bend. Silas looked toward the window where Cross had ridden away. Why did you never tell me? At first, I thought it was nothing but business. Then Father died, and there were bank papers, funeral arrangements, winter feed, and men looking at me like the ranch had already begun slipping from my hands. Her voice thinned. By the time Cross returned months later with his offer to help, I told myself I was letting old suspicion color a practical matter. That was not suspicion, Silas said. That was warning. I know that now. Mr. Whitcomb cleared his throat weakly. I feel it proper to say Mr. Cross has never behaved unlawfully in dealings through this office. Mrs. Prout gave him a look. Amos, if the law caught every snake, no one would watch where they stepped. The bank manager closed his mouth. Silas picked up Jonah's letter. He folded it with careful hands, though his jaw was tight. Did your father mention Cross in this? No, Evelyn said, not by name. Then we do not accuse what we cannot prove. Evelyn looked at him. You believe I am wrong? No, his answer came quick. I believe you are right, but a man like Cross will use one careless word against you harder than honest folks use 10 truths. That settled the room. The blacksmith, a broad man named Henry Vale, rubbed soot from his thumb. What do you need, Miss Hart? Evelyn's eyes moved around the bank. So many faces watched her now. Neighbors, customers, friends of her father, people who had likely whispered about her and Silas more than once over pies and coffee. Yet here they stood, not laughing, not judging, but waiting to be of use. For a moment it almost undid her. She had spent so long proving she could carry everything that being offered help felt like a hand touching a bruise. "I need time," she said, "and I need no one in this town taking Nathaniel Cross's words as truth simply because he speaks them in a fine coat." Mrs. Prout lifted her chin. "That much is already done." Mr. Bell nodded. "I will speak with the livery men. Cross hires wagons through town sometimes. If he starts moving men or materials near Willow Creek, you will know." Henry Vale said, "I will ask around the freight yard. Folks talk while waiting on iron." Thomas stepped forward, eager but nervous. "I can ride the fence lines tonight." Silas turned to him, "Not alone." The boy's pride wilted a little, but he nodded. Evelyn looked at them all. "I am grateful." Mrs. Prout sniffed. "Grateful is fine, but do not make a sermon of it. Your father helped half this town without ringing a bell. Let us return the favor without you apologizing for needing people." Evelyn swallowed and nodded. "If this moment touched your heart, stay with the story, because some truths come softly, while others arrive with dust on their boots and trouble close behind." They left the bank not as a crowd chasing drama, but as a town quietly deciding where it stood. Outside, Mercy Crossing had changed in the bright afternoon. The boardwalks were busy again, but people looked at Evelyn differently now, not with pity, not with curiosity alone, with something steadier. Respect, perhaps, or the memory of Jonah Hart made new through his daughter's courage. Silas walked beside her, leading both horses by the reins. At the hitching post, Evelyn stopped. "You are going to leave this morning." He looked at the saddlebag still tied behind his saddle. "I know." "And now?" He rested a hand on the worn leather. "Now I am ashamed I packed before asking you a single honest question." She watched him untie the first strap. "Not here," she said. He looked at her. A faint sadness passed through her eyes. "Do not unpack in the street just because the town is watching. I do not want you staying because a room full of people heard you say it." Silas's hand stilled. Evelyn stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I want you to stay because when you are alone with your own heart and no one is there to praise you for it, you still choose Willow Creek." The words were not cruel. That made them harder. Silas nodded slowly. "That is fair." "No," she said, "it is frightened, but it is honest." The admission moved him. He saw the woman beneath the strong posture then. The woman who had hidden a letter because love terrified her. The woman who could face a bank, a debt, and a man like Cross, but still feared being chosen for the wrong reason. Silas wanted to take her hand. He did not in the street. Instead, he said, "Then I will ride back with these bags tied, and I will take them off at Willow Creek because I mean to." A small breath left her. "That will do," she said. Thomas came trotting up with a paper sack from the mercantile. "Mrs. Prout said to give you this." Evelyn opened it and found coffee inside, more than she usually bought. A note was pinned to the cloth. "Measured for 2, stop pretending." Evelyn shut the sack quickly, but not before Silas saw. For the first time all day, she laughed. It was short and surprised, but it was real. The sound eased something in him he had not known was clenched. "Mrs. Prout has a dangerous amount of confidence," Silas said. "She has been wrong before," Evelyn replied. "About this." She mounted her horse without answering. Silas smiled faintly and swung into his own saddle. They rode home slower than they had come. Thomas went ahead after promising Silas he would check the north fence with another hand before sunset. The town fell behind them. The road widened into open land again. For a while, neither Silas nor Evelyn spoke. The afternoon light softened along the hills. Cattle grazed in scattered dark shapes. The wind carried the smell of dry grass and creek water. Somewhere beyond the cottonwoods, a meadowlark called once and went quiet. Evelyn finally said, "There is something else." Silas turned his head. "About Cross?" "No, about the debt." He waited. "I made it sound in town like one early payment was the whole victory. It is not. The ranch is better off than Cross wants people to believe, but we are not safe yet." "I know." She glanced at him. "You do." "I have seen the feed numbers. The south roof still needs repair. We lost 2 calves in the cold snap, and that banknote is still a wolf even if you made it sit down today." Her mouth softened. "You noticed all that?" "I have been here 3 years, Evelyn." "Yes," she said quietly, "you have." Silas looked ahead. "How close are you?" "To clearing it." "Yes." She took a long breath. "Closer than anyone knows." He waited again. "I have 4 mares bred from the gray line father nearly gave up on. Colonel Weber wants 2 foals if they come sound. A rancher near Bozeman sent word he may buy the chestnut pair. If all of that holds, and if winter does not break us, I could clear the bank note by next autumn." Silas stared at her. "Next autumn?" "If nothing goes wrong." "That is less than 2 years." "It is less than 1, she said, and there was a thin thread of pride in it. The pride should have warmed him fully, but another feeling moved beneath it. Sorrow. She had done all that work close beside him and never told him how near she was to saving the land. "You carried that alone too," he said. "I did." "Why?" She looked toward the creek. "Because when a woman tells people she is afraid, they either pity her or take inventory of what she might lose. I got used to keeping numbers close." "I am not people." "No," she said, "you are Silas, and somehow that made it harder." He understood more than she knew. When strangers disappointed a person, the hurt could be filed away under what was expected. But when someone beloved failed to see a burden, the wound went deeper. Sometimes it felt safer not to ask them to see it at all. They reached Willow Creek near sundown. The ranch lay gold in the falling light. The house windows burned softly. Smoke rose from the chimney. The barn cast a long shadow across the yard where, that very morning, Silas had been ready to leave forever. He dismounted first. Evelyn stayed in the saddle, watching. Silas led his horse to the same hitching post. His saddlebags were still tied. His bedroll still sat behind the saddle. The road dust had settled over both. He could feel Evelyn's eyes on him. No town watched now. No bank manager. No Nathaniel Cross. No neighbors with folded arms and good advice. Only the house, the barn, the fading light, and the truth of what he meant to do. Silas untied the first strap. Then the second. He lifted the saddlebags down and set them on the porch steps. Evelyn's face changed, but she said nothing. He removed the bedroll next. The horse shook itself, freed of the weight. Silas stood there with his hand on the saddle. "I am still afraid." Evelyn dismounted slowly. "So am I," she said. "I may be poor company while learning not to run. I may be poor company while learning not to hide." He looked at her then, and the last sunlight caught in her eyes. "Then I suppose," he said, "we will be poor company together." She smiled, though tears stood bright on her lashes. For one long breath, the yard held peace. Then a shot cracked somewhere beyond the south pasture. Not near enough to strike the house, not wild enough to be a hunter's mistake. It rang sharp through the evening, sending birds from the cottonwoods and making every horse in the barn stir. Silas turned at once. A second sound followed. Not a shot this time. A horse screaming. Evelyn went white. "The mares," she whispered. Silas was already running for the barn. Yep. Silas reached the barn before Evelyn could cross the yard. He took down the rifle from the pegs beside the door, not because he meant to use it, but because a man did not run toward trouble on a frontier ranch with empty hands. His face had gone still in the dangerous way Evelyn had only seen once before, the day a hired hand nearly lost his arm under a wagon wheel. Not anger first. Control first. Evelyn hurried after him, lifting her skirt clear of the dirt. Silas. Stay by the house. No. He turned just enough to look at her. Evelyn. Those are my horses. The answer ended the argument. He gave one sharp nod, and they moved together. The south pasture lay beyond the barn, down a slope of pale grass where the creek bent wide and slow between cottonwoods. It was the best part of Willow Creek, the place Jonah Hart had refused to sell, the place Nathaniel Cross had wanted badly enough to come calling before the old man died. 4 mares grazed there, each one heavy with the hope of next year's freedom from the bank. As they ran, a third sound came from the pasture. Not a gunshot. Wood cracking. Silas slowed near the last shed and raised one hand, warning Evelyn to stop. The evening light was thin now, pooling gold along the grass but leaving the cottonwoods in shadow. He crouched by the water trough and looked toward the fence line. Evelyn knelt beside him, breath sharp in her chest. At first she saw only movement, horses in panic, shapes cutting across the pasture, dust rising. Then she saw the broken rail near the creek bend hanging loose from one post. A dark figure was moving through the shadows beyond it. Silas lifted the rifle. Hold, Evelyn whispered. He glanced at her. There are mares between us and him. He lowered the barrel by an inch, his jaw tight. The figure bent near the fence. For one moment the light caught a sleeve, not black as Cross had worn, brown, rough cloth, a working man's coat. Silas's eyes narrowed, not Cross. Then who? Before he could answer, the figure swung into the saddle of a horse hidden near the trees. The rider kicked hard and vanished along the creek trail, riding low and fast. Silas rose to follow, but a mare screamed again. Evelyn was already running. The gray mare, Mercy, stood near the broken fence with her sides heaving, eyes rolling white. She had not fallen, but her front leg shook, and a thin cut marked the lower part near the fetlock. Not deep enough to spill much blood, thank the Lord, but enough to terrify an animal heavy with foal. Evelyn slowed before reaching her. Easy, girl, easy now. Her voice changed when she spoke to horses. It became lower, softer, the kind of voice that did not push. Mercy tossed her head and backed away, nearly stumbling. Silas moved to the far side, careful and steady. He set the rifle on the ground where he could reach it but not frighten the mare. Then he lifted both hands. Easy, he murmured. No one is taking anything from you. Evelyn's eyes flicked to him at those words, but he was watching the horse. Together they closed the space inch by inch. The other mares circled near the far corner, nervous but unhurt. The broken fence rail swung in the wind. Near the post, Evelyn saw something pale tied to a nail. A scrap of cloth. Silas saw it too. Later, he said. Mercy snorted and stamped, then shivered all over. Evelyn took another step. That's it. Look at me, sweet girl, just me. The mare's ears twitched toward her voice. Evelyn reached out slowly and touched the horse's neck. Mercy flinched, then stood, trembling under her hand. Evelyn stroked her once, twice, feeling the heat of fear under the coat. Silas eased closer and checked the injured leg without crouching too fast. Clean cut, he said. Looks like wire or a sharp nail, not a bullet. Evelyn closed her eyes for one moment in relief. Can she walk? Likely. We need her in the barn before dark. Together they brought Mercy in slowly. It took patience and every quiet word Evelyn owned. The mare limped but did not collapse. Silas walked at her shoulder, one hand near the halter, the other ready if she panicked. Evelyn stayed close to the horse's head, whispering steady nonsense about warm mash, clean straw, and how no foolish man with a gun was worth her fear. By the time Mercy reached the barn, Thomas Reed and Henry Vale had ridden in from the North Trail, drawn by the gunshot. Thomas slid from his saddle with guilt already written across his young face. "I was checking the north fence," he said. "Like I said I would, I heard it too late." Silas looked at him. "You did nothing wrong." "But if I had been here—" "You would have been one young man against one armed coward in the dark," Silas said. "Do not make regret out of sense." Henry Vale tied his horse and came to the stall. His large hands were gentle as he held the lantern high. Whoever did this meant to scare the herd, not kill. Evelyn looked up sharply. "How can you tell?" Henry pointed toward Mercy's cut. "A man shooting to kill does not miss every animal in an open pasture." He fired wide, broke the rail, likely strung something sharp near the gap to cause panic. Cruel enough, but careful. "Careful," Silas said, and the word sounded bitter. Evelyn wrapped Mercy's leg while Silas held the mare steady. The cloth in her hands trembled only once. When Silas noticed, he shifted closer, letting his shoulder touch hers for a brief second. No speech, no comfort made public, just enough to remind her she was not standing there alone. Thomas returned from the pasture with the scrap of cloth and a bent piece of wire. "Found this tied by the broken rail," he said. The cloth was brown, torn from a sleeve or coat hem. Henry took it between two fingers and frowned. "I know this weave." Silas looked at him. "From where?" "Freight yard. Men who unload for Cross's cattle outfit wear coats made from cloth like this. Cheap, thick, all ordered in the same lot last winter." Evelyn's face went pale again, but this time not from fear. "Can we prove it?" Henry's mouth tightened. "Not from cloth alone." Thomas held up the wire. This was stretched low. Mare likely caught herself when she bolted. Evelyn took the wire and stared at it. A little dirt clung to the twist. Such a small thing to threaten everything she had worked for. Such a small thing to turn hope into terror. Silas looked toward the open barn doors, where evening had gone purple beyond the yard. "This is what Cross meant by consequences." Henry nodded. "Or someone wants you to think so." Silas turned to him. Henry shrugged. "I dislike Cross as much as any man with eyes, but a snake knows how to bite from grass. He may not have touched that fence himself." "He did not need to," Evelyn said. The barn quieted. She tied off Mercy's bandage and stepped back. Her face was tired, streaked with dust, but her eyes were clear. "All my life," she said, "I thought courage meant standing so still no one could see what hurt. Father did it. I learned it from him. But I am beginning to think silence gives cruel men too much room." Silas looked at her with something like awe. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Evelyn looked at the mare, then at the men standing in her barn, then at the old house lit by one lamp in the window. "We document everything," she said. "The cut, the broken rail, the wire, the cloth. Thomas, ride to Mr. Bell and ask if any strange horse came through the lower trail today. Henry, see if that cloth matches what you remember, but do not accuse anyone without certainty." Both men nodded. "Silas," she said. He met her eyes. "You and I go through Father's papers tonight. If Cross visited before Father died, there may be something in the books, a note, a receipt, anything." Silas gave a slow nod. "And if we find it?" "Then tomorrow," Evelyn said, "we stop defending Willow Creek and start fighting for the truth." The word fighting hung there, but there was no taste of revenge in it. Not the bloody kind men boasted about in saloons. This was something steadier. This was a woman done bowing her head to fear. They worked until full dark. Henry rode out with the cloth folded in his pocket. Thomas went to the livery with instructions and returned to sleep in the bunkhouse, though Silas made him promise not to play hero if he heard another sound. Mercy settled at last with clean straw, warm mash, and Evelyn sitting beside the stall long after there was any need. Silas found her there near midnight. She sat on an overturned bucket, Jonah's old lantern hanging from a nail beside her. Its light moved gently over her face, the mare breath slow and heavy. Outside, the wind pushed against the barn walls. Silas leaned in the stall doorway. She will likely keep the foal. Evelyn nodded. You are saying likely because you do not want to promise what only God can decide. Yes, I appreciate that. He stepped inside and rested one hand on the stall rail. For a while, they listened to the horse breathe. Then Evelyn said, I hated you for a moment this morning. Silas did not flinch. I reckon you had cause. When I saw your horse saddled, I thought, there it is. The thing I feared has come for me after all. She looked down at her hands. But then I realized I had helped build that moment, not alone, but I had my share in it. So did I. She looked at him. I do not know how to love a man without trying to protect myself from needing him. Silas's face softened. I do not know how to be loved without looking for the nearest door. A sad smile touched her mouth. We are not very good at this. No, he said, but we are telling the truth. That might be a beginning. The lantern flame trembled. Mercy shifted in her sleep. Evelyn reached into her apron pocket and took out Jonah's letter. She had asked Silas for it earlier, not to keep, but to lay beside the papers they meant to search. Now she held it in both hands. I read it so many times, she said. At first because I missed Father, later because it frightened me, then because it was the only place where what I felt for you existed plainly, even if neither of us had spoken it. Silas came closer. I was wrong to keep it, she said. Yes. The answer was quiet, honest. It hurt, but it did not punish. A tear slipped down her cheek. Will you be able to forgive me? Silas sat on the edge of the feed box across from her. His hat rested in his hands. I think forgiveness is already working in me, he said, but trust may need some chores before it stands strong again. Evelyn let out a breath that was almost a laugh and almost a sob. Trust with chores. That sounds like something Father would say. He taught me useful things. He loved you, you know. Silas looked away. Evelyn watched him fight the words. A man who had grown up without steady love could be wounded by receiving it too late. It was a strange grief, being handed proof that someone had cared only after they were gone. He did, she said. Not instead of me, not because of me, he saw you. Silas's eyes shone in the lantern light. For once he did not turn from it. After a long silence, he said, Then I am sorry I never called him anything but Mr. Hart. Evelyn reached across the small space and placed her hand over his. He knew. The words were simple, but Silas closed his eyes as if they had struck deep. Near dawn, they sat at the kitchen table with Jonah's papers spread before them. Ledgers, receipts, old letters, breeding records, bank notices. Evelyn brewed coffee strong enough to keep grief awake. Silas read with the slow care of a man searching for hoofprints in hard ground. At first there was nothing. Then, tucked inside the back cover of an old account book, Evelyn found a folded note in her father's handwriting. Her breath stopped. Silas looked up. What is it? She opened it carefully. The note was short, only a few lines, dated 5 days before Jonah took ill. Met with N. Cross. He wants South Pasture and Creek Bend. Refused. He hinted the bank note may become difficult if I remain stubborn. Told him Willow Creek is not for sale while I breathe. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the paper. Silas rose slowly. On the back, Jonah had written one more line, darker than the rest, as if pressed hard by a troubled hand. If anything happens, ask Amos Whitcomb, who told Cross the terms of my debt. Evelyn looked at Silas. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, the first gray light of morning touched the window. And for the first time, the danger to Willow Creek had a name written in her father's own hand. Evelyn read her father's note 3 times before the meaning truly settled in her. The first time, she saw only Nathaniel Cross's name. The second time, she saw the threat. The third time, she saw Amos Whitcomb. The bank manager had known the terms of Jonah Hart's debt. That was plain enough. But her father's question sat on the back of the note like a cold hand on her shoulder. Who told Cross? Evelyn stood at the kitchen table with the paper trembling between her fingers. Dawn pressed gray light against the windows. The lamp had burned low. Coffee had gone bitter in the pot. Silas stood across from her, his sleeves rolled to the elbows, his face hollowed by a night without sleep. Neither of them had spoken for a long moment. Outside, Willow Creek stirred awake. A rooster called behind the smokehouse. In the barn, Mercy gave a low, restless sound, and one of the other horses answered. The ranch did not know a dead man had just reached out of old paper and pointed toward betrayal. Silas finally said, "We need to speak with Whitcomb." Evelyn folded the note carefully. "Yes." "Not alone." She looked up. "I was not planning to." Something small passed between them then, a thing that would have gone unspoken before. Once, Evelyn might have taken the note, ridden to town, and told herself it was strength. Once, Silas might have let her, thinking she wanted no help or that he had no right to offer it. Now he reached for his hat. Now she did not stop him. They took breakfast standing in the kitchen because neither had patience to sit. Evelyn wrapped Jonah's note and letter in oilcloth and slipped them into the inner pocket of her coat. Silas stepped outside to saddle the horses, only to pause on the porch. His saddlebags still sat there, where he had left them the night before. For a moment he looked at them. Evelyn came to the doorway behind him. He did not touch the bags, not yet. Instead, he turned and looked at her with tired eyes. "When this is done," he said, "I will carry those inside." Her throat tightened. "When this is done," she answered, "I will show you where Father kept the spare room key." A faint smile touched his mouth. "The room over the kitchen." "You know the one." "I fixed that window twice. It leaks cold air in winter." "I know." "Then you will have to fix it a third time." Silas's smile deepened just enough to soften the morning. "Yes, ma'am." It was not a promise spoken with grand words. It was only a window, a key, a room. But to a man who had lived with his life tied behind a saddle, it was almost more than he could answer. They rode from Mercy Crossing after leaving Thomas Reed at the ranch with strict orders. He was to watch the south pasture, keep Mercy calm, and ride for Henry Vale if he saw anything more dangerous than a loose hen. Thomas accepted the duty with a solemn face, though the rifle beside the barn door made him look younger rather than braver. The road to town was quiet. A thin mist lay near the creek. The horses' hooves made soft sounds in the damp dirt. Evelyn rode with one hand pressed against the pocket where Jonah's note rested. Silas noticed but did not mention it. Halfway there she spoke. "I keep thinking of Father writing that." Silas glanced over. "He must have been afraid," she said. "He never let me see it." "Your father did not show fear easy." "No," her mouth tightened. "I used to think that made him strong." "It did in some ways." "And in others?" Silas looked ahead. "In others, it taught you to hide pain so well nobody knew when to stand beside you." Evelyn did not answer at once. The truth of it hurt, but it did not feel like blame. It felt like a door opening in a room she had lived in too long. My father loved by carrying things alone, she said. He was not the only one. Silas's voice was gentle. That made it worse and better at the same time. Evelyn looked toward the ridge where the sun was beginning to rise. I do not want to love that way anymore. Silas nodded. Then we will have to keep correcting each other when old habits get loud. You make that sound easy. No, he said, I make it sound necessary. By the time they reached Mercy Crossing, town had only begun to wake. The mercantile shutters were half open. Smoke rose from the bakery chimney. A boy swept dust from the boardwalk in front of the barber's shop, only to watch the wind carry half of it back. Mrs. Prout saw them first. She stood outside her store with a coffee sack in one hand and a look sharp enough to cut twine. You two look like you spent the night arguing with ghosts, she said. Evelyn dismounted, close enough. Mrs. Prout's eyes narrowed, cross. Whitcomb, Silas said. The older woman's face changed. Not surprise exactly, more like a suspicion finding its boots. I wondered when someone would say that name with the proper weight. Evelyn stepped closer. What do you know? Mrs. Prout looked up and down the street before answering. Amos Whitcomb is not a wicked man, but weak men can do wicked work when frightened by stronger ones. Has Cross been pressing him? Silas asked. I have seen Cross leave the bank twice after closing. Both times Amos looked like a man who had swallowed a nail. Evelyn's hand tightened on the reins. Why did you not tell me? Mrs. Prout lifted one brow. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. Because I acted like I did not need telling. I was going to say because half this town lives on guesses and I prefer not to sell mine as facts, Mrs. Prout said. But your answer has use too. Despite everything, Silas nearly smiled. Mrs. Prout softened. Go carefully. A frightened man will lie if he thinks truth costs more. They crossed to the bank. The door was locked but light showed inside. Silas knocked once hard. After a long shuffle, Amos Whitcomb appeared behind the glass. His hair was not fully combed. His collar sat crooked. When he saw Evelyn and Silas, the little color in his face disappeared. We are not open yet, he said through the door. Evelyn held up the folded oilcloth. Open anyway. Whitcomb hesitated. Silas said nothing. He only stood there, calm and broad-shouldered, with the patience of a man who could wait all morning and make the waiting feel like judgment. The lock clicked. Inside, the bank smelled stale, as if the stove had gone cold overnight and no fresh air had yet been allowed in. Whitcomb hurried behind his desk, touching papers that did not need touching. Miss Hart, he began. If this concerns yesterday's unfortunate public scene, I assure you the payment has been properly recorded. It concerns my father. Whitcomb froze. Silas closed the door behind them. Evelyn laid Jonah's note on the desk and unfolded it. Whitcomb's eyes dropped to the handwriting. He did not reach for it. He did not need to. His face had already confessed that he knew enough to fear what the paper might say. My father wrote this 5 days before he became ill, Evelyn said. Read the back. Whitcomb looked at her. Read it, she repeated. His hand shook as he turned the note. The bank became so quiet Evelyn could hear the soft tick of the regulator clock on the wall. Whitcomb read the final line. If anything happens, ask Amos Whitcomb who told Cross the terms of my debt. The bank manager sat down slowly. Silas stepped forward. Who told him? Whitcomb rubbed one hand over his mouth. You must understand, I never meant harm to Jonah. Evelyn's heart sank. Who told him? Whitcomb looked at her, and shame filled his face in a way too human to dismiss. I did. The words landed like a dropped stone. Evelyn gripped the back of the chair before her knees could weaken. Silas's voice stayed low. Why? Whitcomb's eyes glistened behind his spectacles. Cross came asking about land prices first, then about notes held in the valley. I refused him, I did, but he already knew I had made poor investments through a cousin in St. Louis, foolish paper schemes. I was short. Not from the bank accounts, he added quickly, looking at Evelyn with panic. Never from depositors. But enough that my position here would have been ruined. Cross knew, Silas said. Yes. And used it. Whitcomb nodded. Evelyn's voice was barely above a whisper. So you told him about my father's debt. I told him the size of the note and renewal terms. I told myself it was only information. He said he wanted to help Jonah settle matters. He said if he purchased the south pasture, everyone would benefit. I did not know he would threaten him. But he did, Evelyn said. Whitcomb looked down. Yes. And after father died, you let Cross keep circling this ranch. I was afraid. Evelyn laughed once, but there was no humor in it. Of him. Of him, of exposure, of losing my post, of my wife learning how foolish I had been, of everyone in this town looking at me like I was smaller than they believed. Tears stood in his eyes now. Fear makes a man bargain away pieces of himself and call it survival. Silas looked at Evelyn. The words were too close to both of them. Fear had made Whitcomb betray. Fear had made Evelyn hide. Fear had made Silas nearly leave. The difference was not that fear had touched only the weak. The difference was what a person did after seeing the damage. Evelyn drew a breath. My father died believing someone had handed Cross a knife and left him to wonder who. Whitcomb bowed his head. I am sorry. Sorry will not mend the fence. It will not calm my mare. It will not give my father back peace in his last week. No. Silas leaned both hands on the desk. Did Cross send a man to Willow Creek last night? Whitcomb looked startled. Last night. Fence cut, wire strung, shot fired near the mares. Whitcomb went gray. Lord help us. Did he? Silas asked. I do not know, but there is a man who works for him. Wade Mercer. Brown coat, scar under one eye, rides a bay with white socks. I saw him outside Cross's room at the hotel before dawn. Evelyn looked at Silas. Brown coat. A rider along the creek. The pieces drew closer. Will you write this down? Evelyn asked. Whitcomb's eyes lifted. What? All of it, what you told Cross. Why, what Cross said, what you know of Wade Mercer. He swallowed. A written confession would ruin me. Evelyn leaned forward, her voice steady now. You helped a man threaten my father, pressure my ranch, and maybe endanger my horses. Ruin is not what I am asking for. Truth is. Whitcomb shook visibly. Silas spoke then, not kindly, but not cruelly. You can keep being afraid of Cross, or you can be more afraid of what you have become beside him. The bank manager closed his eyes. For one long moment, nothing moved but dust in the window light. Then Amos Whitcomb pulled a sheet of bank paper from the drawer, dipped his pen into ink, and began to write. Evelyn stood there while he wrote every word. Her father's note lay beside the confession. Jonah's old handwriting and Amos's fresh one faced each other across the desk like past and present finally meeting. When Whitcomb finished, he signed his name at the bottom. Then, after a trembling pause, he opened the bank safe and removed a smaller sealed envelope. I kept these, he said, in case Cross turned on me. Silas took the envelope and opened it. Inside were 2 notes from Nathaniel Cross to Amos Whitcomb. Neither was long, but both were enough. Cross had referenced Jonah's debt directly before Jonah himself had ever discussed it with him. In one line, he suggested Whitcomb's financial trouble would remain private if cooperation continued. Evelyn read the words and felt something cold settle into certainty. It was not full justice yet, but it was proof. Whitcomb whispered, "What will you do?" Evelyn folded the papers and placed them inside her coat. "I am going to speak with Sheriff Dawes." Whitcomb flinched. "Miss Hart." "And you are coming with us." The banker looked as if he might refuse, but then Silas stepped aside and opened the bank door. Outside, morning had fully arrived in Mercy Crossing. Wagons rolled, bells rang, voices drifted down the street. Ordinary life had no idea it was about to make room for truth. Whitcomb stood slowly, a ruined-looking man holding his hat in both hands. Evelyn stepped out first. Silas followed beside her. For once, she did not feel alone under the weight of what she carried. But across the street, near the hotel balcony, a curtain shifted. Silas saw it. A man with a scar under one eye looked down at them from the second floor. Then he disappeared into the dark room behind him. Silas saw the scarred man vanish from the hotel window, and every quiet part of him went still. He did not shout. He did not run. Men who had lived too long around danger knew panic was a gift handed to the wrong side. Instead, he stepped closer to Evelyn as she crossed the street with Amos Whitcomb beside her, and he kept his voice low. "Do not look up." Evelyn's hand tightened around the papers inside her coat. "Wade Mercer." "Likely." Whitcomb made a small frightened sound. "Lord preserve us." Silas did not take his eyes from the hotel balcony. He is not the Lord's concern at the moment. Sheriff Eli Dawes kept his office beside the jail, a square building of rough boards, iron bars, and dust that never seemed to leave no matter how often his deputy swept. Dawes was a broad, gray-haired man with a limp from an old winter injury and eyes that had grown tired without growing foolish. He had known Jonah Hart for 20 years and had once said Jonah could tell a lie if politeness required it, but his ears would turn red before the sentence ended. When Evelyn entered, Sheriff Dawes stood. "Miss Hart," he said, then looked past her to Silas and Whitcomb. "This looks like trouble wearing Sunday clothes." "It is," Evelyn said. She laid everything on his desk. Jonah's note, Amos Whitcomb's confession, the 2 letters from Nathaniel Cross. The scrap of brown cloth Henry had returned that morning with his own written statement, saying it matched the coats used by Cross's freight men. The bent wire from the pasture, Thomas Reed's account of the gunshot and the rider seen near the creek trail. The sheriff listened without interruption. That was one reason people trusted Eli Dawes. He did not hurry a story because he liked the sound of his own voice. He leaned back in his chair, one hand resting near his coffee cup, and let truth walk in at its own pace. When Evelyn finished, the office was quiet. Dawes picked up Jonah's note first. He read it slowly. His face did not change much, but something around his mouth hardened. "Jonah wrote this." "Yes," Evelyn said. "You are certain?" "I know my father's hand." Dawes nodded and passed it to his deputy, a young man named Peter Shaw. "Lock that in the evidence drawer." Whitcomb flinched at the word evidence. Dawes looked at him. "Amos, did you write this confession willing?" Whitcomb stared at his hat. "I wrote it ashamed, Sheriff, but willing. Shame has put more men on the right road than pride ever did." Dawes folded the confession. "Do you stand by it?" Whitcomb swallowed. "Yes." "Then sit down before you fall down." Whitcomb sat. Evelyn remained standing. She felt that if she sat, the weight of the night would catch up and pull her clear through the chair. Silas stood near the door, watching the street through the dusty glass. Dawes noticed, "You expecting company, Boone?" Wade Mercer was watching from the hotel. The sheriff's brows drew together, scar under one eye. "Yes." Dawes looked at his deputy. "Peter, step out the back and find Henry Vale. Tell him to stay near the livery and keep his eyes open. Quietly." Peter went. Evelyn took a breath. Can you arrest Cross? Dawes leaned forward. I can question him. I can hold Mercer if I find cause. I can send word to the county judge and make sure these papers are seen proper. But I will not dress Hope up as law for your comfort, Miss Hart. Not yet. Her mouth tightened, but she nodded. I would rather have truth than comfort. I figured as much. Silas turned from the window. If Cross runs. Then running says plenty, Dawes said. But I would rather catch a man standing in his own lie than chase him across half the territory. He stood, took his hat from the peg, and reached for his gun belt. Before he could buckle it, the front door opened. Mrs. Prout stepped in with her basket on one arm and Thomas Reed close behind her, breathless again. Thomas looked as if the whole town had been chasing him and he had volunteered for it. Sheriff, Mrs. Prout said, the hotel keeper says Mr. Cross has ordered his trunks brought down. Dawes looked at Silas. Silas looked at Evelyn. The room tightened around them. Thomas held out a folded paper, and Mr. Bell said Wade Mercer just paid cash for 2 fresh horses at the livery, said he needed them ready within the hour. Dawes took the paper. Within the hour. Yes, sir. Mrs. Prout lifted her chin. I do not know the law on leaving town in a hurry, Sheriff, but I know what guilt looks like when it packs. Dawes pointed at her. Abigail, for once do not follow. For once, Sheriff, do not insult me. I mean it. So do I. Evelyn would have laughed if fear had not been sitting in her ribs. Dawes turned to Silas. You armed? Yes. You keep that rifle in its scabbard, unless I say different. Silas nodded. I came for truth, not blood. Good, because the town has had enough men mistaking one for the other. They crossed the street in a careful group. Dawes went first, walking with his limp and his hand near his belt. Silas kept beside Evelyn. Whitcomb followed, looking smaller than he had ever looked behind his bank desk. Mrs. Prout did not follow directly, which for her was the same as obedience. She simply walked to the mercantile porch and watched with half the town gathering quietly behind her. The hotel stood at the corner with its upper balcony casting a long shadow over the boardwalk. A porter was loading a leather trunk onto a wagon. 2 saddled horses waited near the side alley, both fresh, both restless. Wade Mercer stood beside them. In daylight he was easier to read. Hard eyes, scar under the left one, brown coat with a torn patch near the cuff. Evelyn saw the tear and her stomach turned. Mercer's hand drifted toward his hip when he saw the sheriff. Dawes stopped in the street. I would admire your good sense, Wade, if you showed some right now. Mercer's hand froze. Silas stepped half a pace in front of Evelyn before he seemed to know he had done it. She touched his arm once, not to move him away, but to remind him she was still there. Dawes walked closer. You were seen near Willow Creek last night. Mercer spat into the dirt. Plenty of men ride trails. Plenty do. Fewer cut fences and string wire near valuable mares. Mercer's eyes flicked toward Evelyn. That flicker was enough for Silas to remember. Dawes noticed too. Turn around. I ain't done nothing. Then you can be innocent facing the wall. Mercer looked toward the hotel door. Nathaniel Cross stepped out before the glance could fully settle. He wore a gray traveling coat now, not the black one from morning. His gloves were buttoned. His face was calm, but Evelyn saw what had not been there before. Strain. Sheriff, Cross said, I hope this street performance has purpose. Dawes looked at him. It does. I need you to come with me and answer questions. Cross smiled. About what? Jonah Hart's debt, Amos Whitcomb's confession, your letters to him, Wade Mercer's ride last night. We can begin there and see where the road leads. For the first time since Evelyn had met him, Nathaniel Cross did not answer quickly. His eyes moved to Whitcomb. The bank manager lowered his head. "You fool," Cross said softly. The words were quiet, but everyone nearby heard them. Dawes' face hardened. "That is one answer already." Cross adjusted his gloves. "Sheriff, you are allowing a grieving woman and a jealous ranch hand to shape a foolish tale." Evelyn stepped forward before Silas could speak. "No," she said, "for once I am shaping my own." The street went still. Cross's mouth curved. "Miss Hart, you are tired, you are frightened, you have mistaken business pressure for villainy. I know the difference between pressure and a threat. My father knew it too. He was an old man under debt." "He was an honest man under debt," Evelyn said, "and you used a weaker man's fear to learn what you had no right to know." Cross looked around at the gathering townsfolk. He seemed to understand, perhaps too late, that this was no longer a private pressure behind bank doors. Mercy Crossing had come to watch. Silas spoke then. "Did you send Mercer to the pasture?" Cross looked at him with cold dislike. "You overestimate your importance." "No," Silas said. "I underestimated my place. I will not do that twice." Wade Mercer moved suddenly. Not toward Silas. Toward the saddled horses. Dawes shouted. Mercer grabbed the reins and swung up fast, kicking hard into the alley. The second horse broke loose, crashing against the wagon. People scattered from the boardwalk. Silas moved without thinking, but Evelyn caught his sleeve. "Silas, no." He stopped, torn between Chase and her hand. Sheriff Dawes drew his revolver but did not fire into a street full of townspeople. Henry Vale appeared from the livery, cutting across Mercer's path with a wagon team. Mercer yanked his horse aside. The animal slipped on loose dirt near the trough, stumbled, and threw him hard against the ground. The whole street seemed to gasp at once. Mercer groaned and tried to rise. Henry reached him first and planted one heavy boot near his hand. "Stay sensible." Dawes and his deputy ran to bind him. No blood, no glory, no cheap victory, just a cruel man face down in the dust because panic had poor balance. Cross watched it happen, and the last of his smoothness drained away. Dawes turned back toward him. "Nathaniel Cross, you are coming with me." Cross lifted his chin. "On what charge?" "For now," Dawes said, "questioning related to intimidation, conspiracy, and destruction of property. The judge can dress it in finer language when he arrives." Cross's eyes found Evelyn one last time. "You think this saves your ranch?" he said. Evelyn felt the old fear rise, but this time it did not stand alone. She thought of her father's note, Mercy trembling in the barn, Silas's saddlebags on the porch, her own silence, his leaving, all the things nearly lost because fear had been allowed to speak first. "No," she said, "work will save my ranch, truth will protect it, and love will make it worth saving." Mrs. Prout wiped one eye and pretended dust had attacked her. If you believe one honest truth can stand taller than a rich man's lie, leave a like for Evelyn and Silas before the last pieces of this story come home. Dawes led Cross toward the jail. Mercer was brought after him, limping and cursing under his breath. The town watched in silence until the jail door closed. Only then did Evelyn feel her knees weaken. Silas caught her before she fell. "I am all right," she whispered. "I know," he said, "but I have you anyway." She leaned into him for one breath, right there in the street, too tired to care who saw. Across the road, Whitcomb stood alone outside the sheriff's office, hat crushed in his hands. His confession had helped, but it had not cleansed him. That road would be longer. Evelyn looked at him and felt something complicated. Not forgiveness yet, not hatred either. Perhaps the beginning of understanding that justice did not always arrive as thunder. Sometimes it arrived as a ruined man finally telling the truth. Silas followed her gaze. "What now?" Evelyn looked toward the road home. Now we go back to Willow Creek, she said. There is a mare in the barn who needs watching, a fence that needs mending, and saddlebags on my porch that do not belong there anymore. Silas looked at her. The smallest smile moved between them. But as they turned toward their horses, Sheriff Dawes called from the jail steps. "Miss Hart." Evelyn looked back. Dawes held up one of Cross's travel papers, his face grave. "You need to see this before you ride home." Yes. Evelyn crossed back to the jail steps with Silas at her side. Sheriff Dawes held the paper in one hand, but he did not offer it right away. That troubled her more than if he had looked angry. Eli Dawes was not a man who gave fear extra room. If his face had gone grave, then whatever he had found carried weight. "What is it?" Evelyn asked. Dawes looked toward the closed jail door, then back at her. "A purchase agreement." Silas's eyes narrowed. "For Willow Creek?" "No," Dawes said. "For the land east of your south pasture." Evelyn frowned. "That belongs to the old Hasker place." "Belonged," Dawes said. "Cross bought the note on it 6 months ago through a company name, took possession last week." Evelyn felt the ground shift beneath her. The Hasker place had sat mostly empty since the old couple moved to live with their son near Bozeman. Its land was rough, scrubby, and not worth much except for one thing. It bordered Willow Creek's water. Silas understood at the same moment she did. He was not only after the pasture. Dawes nodded. "Looks to me like he meant to control both sides of the creek bend. If he could force you to sell, he would own the whole water line through that section." Evelyn took the paper. The words blurred at first, not because she could not read them, but because anger made her eyes hot. Cross had not simply wanted to marry his way into Willow Creek. He had not simply wanted to buy cheap land from a grieving woman. He had been laying boards for a bridge long before she knew there was water to cross. Silas's voice was quiet. "With that creek, he controls winter grazing for half the lower valley. And any ranch that needs passage in a dry year," Dawes said. "That makes a man powerful." Evelyn looked toward the bank across the street. Father knew the south pasture mattered. He knew Cross was reaching for more than a strip of grass. "Likely," Dawes said. Mrs. Prout had drifted close enough to hear, though she pretended to examine the jailhouse window box, which had not held flowers in years. "That man wanted a kingdom," she said, "and thought a woman's grief would make a fine gate." Evelyn folded the paper with stiff fingers. "Can he still use the Hasker land against us?" Dawes rubbed his jaw. "Owning land is not a crime, but if we prove he tried to force yours through threats, damage, and bank pressure, a judge may keep him from profiting by it. At minimum, it gives us reason to look deeper." Silas looked down the street, where townspeople still watch from doorways. "Then we need every truth before he has time to bury any." Dawes nodded. "I have already sent Peter for the county judge, but Cross has money. He will have lawyers. He will claim misunderstanding, business, bad help, anything that keeps his hands clean." Evelyn's fingers tightened around the paper. Then a thought came to her, small and bright. "The hotel trunk." Silas turned. "What?" Mrs. Prout said his trunks were being loaded. If he was leaving in a hurry, he may have carried papers with him. Dawes looked toward the hotel. "We need cause to search." A voice spoke from behind them. "Sheriff." They all turned. The hotel porter stood near the boardwalk, twisting his cap in both hands. He was a thin young man named Leo, barely more than 17, with straw-colored hair and the frightened look of someone who had overheard too much and wished courage were easier. Dawes stepped down. "What is it, son?" Leo swallowed. "Mr. Cross told me to burn some papers from his room stove after he left, said not to read them. I did not burn them." The street seemed to pull in a breath. Mrs. Prout marched toward him. "Where are they?" Leo looked at the sheriff, not her. In the ash bucket behind the kitchen. I got scared when I saw Mr. Mercer run. Dawes put a hand on the boy's shoulder. You did right telling me. They went to the hotel together. The owner, Mr. Lyle, was more than willing to let the sheriff inspect anything if it kept his establishment from being known as the place where Nathaniel Cross escaped justice. Behind the kitchen, beside a stack of split wood, sat a dented ash bucket with curled papers inside. Some edges were burned. Most were only smoke-stained. Dawes lifted them carefully onto a flour sack. Silas stood close, reading over his shoulder. There were numbers first, land parcels, water access notes, names of nearby ranchers, then a rough map of the creek bend with Willow Creek's south pasture marked in dark pencil and the Hasker land circled hard enough to tear the paper. At the bottom was one line in Cross's hand. Hart woman must sell before winter, pressure bank, use Mercer if needed, no open scandal. Evelyn read the words once. Then again. The kitchen noise faded. The stove, the street, the murmur of townspeople outside, all of it fell away beneath those few cruel words. Hart woman. Not Evelyn, not Miss Hart, not rancher, not neighbor. Only an obstacle described by her father's name and her sex, as if her life, work, grief, and love were no more than brush to clear from land he wanted. Silas looked at her, and the anger in his face was deep, but he did not speak for her. He had learned. Sheriff Dawes folded the paper. This changes matters. Mrs. Prout, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, said, It ought to change the temperature of his jail cell, too. Dawes ignored that. I will send copies to the judge. Cross will have a harder time calling this business. Evelyn nodded, but her hand had moved to the edge of the table. She steadied herself there, not because she was weak, but because relief can sometimes feel as heavy as fear. Silas stepped nearer. Breathe. I am. Not much. She took a breath then, and another. Leo the porter stood by the stove, eyes lowered. Evelyn turned to him. Thank you, she said. The boy looked startled. I almost burned them. But you did not. I was afraid. So was I, Evelyn said. Most of this started because frightened people stayed quiet. Leo nodded, as if that meant more to him than scolding ever could. By late afternoon, the judge's messenger had been sent. Mercer had admitted enough to place himself at Willow Creek, and Cross had stopped speaking except to demand counsel. Amos Whitcomb remained in the sheriff's office, ruined and pale, but willing now to repeat his confession in writing for the county court. Justice had not finished its work, but it had begun. Evelyn and Silas rode home as the sun lowered red behind the ridge. Neither spoke much. The day had emptied them. The road to Willow Creek looked different now, as roads do after a person stops running from the truth and starts carrying it home. When the ranch came into view, Evelyn saw Thomas standing by the barn with one hand raised. The mare's calm, he called as they rode in. Ate some, leg looks fair. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly in gratitude. Silas dismounted and helped her down, though she did not need help. She let him anyway. Thomas looked at the porch. I moved your saddlebags inside, Mr. Boone. Figured they were tired of sitting there. Silas stared at him. The young hand's face reddened. Was that wrong? For a moment, Silas could not answer. Inside. His few belongings had crossed a threshold, without him carrying them away again. Evelyn looked at Silas, her eyes soft. No, he said finally, that was not wrong. Thomas smiled, relieved, and hurried toward the bunkhouse. Evening settled over Willow Creek. The windows glowed. Horses shifted in the barn. The creek moved in the distance, still belonging to itself for one more night. Evelyn and Silas stood together by the porch steps. I kept thinking, she said, that saving this ranch meant paying the note. It does. But not only that. She looked out across the yard. It means not letting fear decide who we become while paying it. Silas nodded. Your father would be proud. Her face trembled. I hope so. He would. She looked at him. And what about you? What about me? Are you staying because of father's letter, because of Cross, because the town heard you say it? Silas looked through the open doorway. His saddlebag sat just inside the hall. Then he looked back at Evelyn. I am staying because when Thomas carried my bags inside, something in me did not reach for the road. His voice roughened. It reached for the door. Evelyn's eyes filled. Before she could answer, a sound came from the barn. A soft, strange call. Mercy! Evelyn turned quickly, fear flashing across her face. Silas took the lantern from the porch rail. Come on. They hurried to the barn together. Mercy stood in her stall, restless but not panicked. Her ears were forward. Her injured leg held steady. In the clean straw near her hind feet, small and wet and trembling under the lantern light, lay a newborn foal. Evelyn covered her mouth. The little creature lifted its head, wobbling toward its first breath of strength. Silas stood beside her, silent. After all the fear, all the lies, all the damage meant to break Willow Creek before winter, new life had arrived in the dark without asking anyone's permission. Evelyn leaned into Silas's shoulder. He did not move away. The foal tried to stand, failed, and tried again. And in that fragile, stubborn movement, Evelyn saw the whole truth of the ranch, of love, and of the life waiting for them if they were brave enough to keep choosing it. Yes. The foal stood on its third try. Its legs trembled beneath it, thin and awkward, but it rose all the same. Mercy turned her head and breathed over the little creature's damp neck with a tenderness that made the whole barn seem softer. The lantern light moved across clean straw, old boards, and Evelyn's tear-bright face. Silas stood beside her without speaking. Some moments did not need a man to place words on them. Some were holy because they were quiet. The foal took one uncertain step, then another, and nearly folded. Evelyn reached out by instinct, but Silas gently caught her wrist. Let him try. She looked at him. He has to learn his own legs, Silas said. Evelyn let her hand fall. The foal wobbled, leaned against Mercy's side, and found its balance. Evelyn let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. Stubborn little thing. Comes from good blood. The mare's or mine. Silas looked at her then, and there was warmth in his tired eyes. Both. She lowered her gaze, but the smile stayed. Outside, night had settled over Willow Creek. The danger was not fully gone. Nathaniel Cross sat in the Mercy Crossing jail, but he had money enough to hire men with clean collars and clever tongues. Wade Mercer had been caught, but a confession made under fear could change shape by morning. Amos Whitcomb had told the truth, but truth still needed to pass through court, paper, and the patience of law. The bank note still existed. Winter would still come. A foal could still grow sick before dawn. Life had not turned easy just because love had finally stopped hiding. But Evelyn felt, for the first time in years, that hard things did not mean lonely things. She reached into her coat and drew out her father's old letter. The paper was folded carefully now, its worn creases deep from the hands that had feared it, hidden it, read it, and finally let it speak. Silas saw it and grew still. I want to read the last part again, she said. He nodded. They stood together outside Mercy's stall, while the mare nuzzled her foal, and Evelyn opened Jonah Hart's letter beneath the lantern flame. Her voice shook only once. Silas Boone is a man who has spent much of his life believing roads are safer than rooms. I know that look because I wore some form of it myself when I was young. He thinks leaving keeps a heart whole. It does not. It only teaches a heart to break quietly. Silas looked down. Evelyn kept reading. My daughter is stronger than she knows, but strength can become a locked door if no one knocks with patience. She will try to carry more than one life was meant to carry. Do not let her, not by force, not by pride. Stand near enough that she remembers she does not have to prove sorrow is manageable before she is worthy of help. A tear slipped down Evelyn's cheek. Silas's hand found hers. She read the final line slowly. If the two of you find the courage to speak plainly, Willow Creek may yet become more than land, debt, and work. It may become the home both of you have been pretending not to need. Do not let silence steal what love has already given you both. The paper lowered. For a while, only Mercy's quiet breathing filled the barn. Silas touched the edge of the letter with one finger. He knew me better than I knew myself. He knew both of us. I wish I had thanked him. Evelyn folded the letter. Maybe staying will be a kind of thanks. Silas looked around the barn at the horses, the lantern, the tack on the walls, the new foals still learning the shape of the world. Yes, he said, maybe it will. The next weeks tested every word they had spoken. Sheriff Dawes brought the matter before the county judge. Nathaniel Cross tried at first to deny everything, then to blame Mercer, then to call his notes private business plans misunderstood by emotional people. But Amos Whitcomb, pale and shaking, stood in the judge's room and told the truth. Leo from the hotel told how Cross had ordered papers burned. Henry Vale brought the torn cloth and matched it to Mercer's coat. Thomas Reed gave his account of the rider and the gunshot. Mrs. Prout gave no official evidence except what she called common sense, which the judge did not write down but seemed to hear anyway. Wade Mercer broke before Cross did. He admitted he had gone to Willow Creek to frighten the horses and damage the fence. He said Cross had never told him to kill an animal, only to make the ranch feel unsafe and weak before winter. It was an ugly truth, but not a bloody one, and that mattered. Justice in Mercy Crossing did not arrive through revenge. It arrived through statements, signatures, witnesses, and a town no longer willing to look away. Cross was ordered held for trial and forbidden from approaching Willow Creek or interfering with Evelyn's land, stock, or bank affairs. His purchase of the Hasker place was placed under review because of the evidence that he had sought to use pressure and hidden information to force Evelyn's sale. When the judge spoke those words, Evelyn did not smile. She only closed her eyes. Silas stood beside her, close enough that his sleeve touched hers. Afterward, outside the courthouse, Amos Whitcomb approached with his hat in both hands. His wife stood across the street, watching him with a face full of hurt and weary loyalty. He looked older than he had the day before. Miss Hart, he said, I do not ask forgiveness. Not yet, maybe not ever, but the bank board has accepted my resignation. Evelyn studied him. What will you do? Repair what I can, if there is work honest enough to take me. Silas said nothing. Evelyn thought of her father's final week, thought of Whitcomb's fear, thought of the way one hidden weakness had opened a door for Cross. She did not feel ready to forgive him, but she no longer wished to be ruled by bitterness either. Tell the truth sooner next time, she said. Whitcomb nodded, tears filling his eyes. Yes, ma'am. That was all she gave him. It was enough for that day. Back at Willow Creek, Silas carried his saddlebags from the hall to the room over the kitchen. The room was small, with a slanted ceiling, a narrow bed, a washstand, and the stubborn window he had promised to fix for the third time. Dust lay on the sill. A quilt Evelyn's mother had sewn years before rested folded at the foot of the bed. Silas stood in the doorway longer than necessary. Evelyn watched him from the hall. It is not much. He stepped inside and set the saddlebags down beside the bed. It is more than I have had in a long while. She leaned against the doorframe. A room. A place where someone expects me to be in the morning." Her expression softened. The days that followed were not filled with grand speeches. They were filled with repair. Silas mended the south fence with Thomas and Henry Vale. Evelyn checked Mercy's bandage twice a day and watched the foal grow stronger. Mrs. Prout came by with coffee measured for two, and a pie she claimed had burned too much to sell, though it tasted better than any pie in Mercy Crossing had a right to taste. Sheriff Dawes sent word when legal papers needed signing. The new bank manager, a stern widow named Mrs. Eleanor Pike, reviewed Evelyn's accounts and declared Willow Creek strained but sound, which became the finest compliment Evelyn had received in years. Silas did not become a partner because of Jonah's letter. He refused that. Instead, he took the savings he had gathered from 20 years of careful, lonely living and placed them on Evelyn's kitchen table one quiet evening. She looked at the money, then at him. "What is this?" "My share." "Silas, I am not buying you. I am not buying forgiveness, and I am not paying a debt your father meant to settle with kindness." "Then what are you doing?" He sat across from her, hands open on the table, choosing with something more than words. Evelyn's eyes searched his face. "I want to earn my place at Willow Creek," he said. "Not because Jonah asked it, not because Cross forced the matter, not because you need saving. You do not. I want my name on this ranch beside yours because I mean to build here, lose sleep here, fix roofs here, bury good horses here, argue over fence posts here, and grow old enough that some young fool has to tell me when I am being stubborn." Evelyn's mouth trembled. "You are already stubborn." "Then I have made a fair start." She laughed through her tears. They signed the partnership papers 1 month later at Mrs. Pike's bank desk. Evelyn Hart and Silas Boone, joint owners of Willow Creek Ranch, not equal because a dead man had wished it, equal because the living chose it plainly. That autumn, under cottonwoods turned gold by the creek, they married. It was a small wedding, though half the valley arrived anyway. Thomas wore a coat too large for him and cried harder than he wanted anyone to notice. Henry Vale stood near the back with his blacksmith hands folded carefully. Sheriff Dawes removed his hat for the whole ceremony. Mrs. Prout took credit for the entire marriage, declaring to anyone close enough to hear that she had been measuring coffee for too long before either Silas or Evelyn had gathered the sense to admit why. Evelyn wore a simple cream dress. In her hand, hidden beneath a small bunch of wildflowers, she carried Jonah's letter. Not because the letter had made the marriage happen, because it had nearly arrived too late to save what silence had almost taken. When the vows were done, Silas kissed her gently, not like a man claiming something, but like one grateful to be trusted with it. Mercy's foal, now strong-legged and curious, broke loose from Thomas near the fence and trotted halfway into the gathering before being caught. The whole valley laughed, even Sheriff Dawes, though he tried to hide it behind a cough. Evelyn looked at the foal, then at Silas. "What should we name him?" she asked. Silas pretended to consider. "Trouble. He deserves better." "Truth." She smiled. "That sounds heavy for such a wobbly creature." "Then what?" Evelyn looked toward the creek, where the sunlight moved bright over the water her father had refused to sell. "Promise," she said. Silas nodded. "Promise it is." Years passed, as years do when people are busy living instead of fearing the loss of life. Willow Creek survived the winter, then another. The debt was cleared sooner than expected because Evelyn's horses became known across the territory for their steady minds and strong hearts. Silas trained young hands with patience that reminded older folks of Jonah Hart. The south pasture stayed green. The creek kept running. Promise grew into a fine horse with Mercy's gentle eye, and a habit of pushing open gates if Thomas forgot the latch. In time, a child's laughter joined the sounds of the ranch. A little girl named Anna learned to walk by holding Silas's thumb in the kitchen. Years later, she sat on the parlor floor while Evelyn opened the small wooden box where the old things were kept. Jonah's watch, Silas's mother's blue ribbon, the tintype of a lonely boy and a woman who had not known how to stay, the deed to Willow Creek, and the letter that had waited too long but not too late. Anna touched the yellow envelope with careful fingers. "Did Grandpa Jonah's letter make Papa stay?" she asked. Evelyn looked across the room at Silas, who sat by the window mending a small bridle. His hair had silver at the temples now. His boots were dusty. His hands were still careful. "No," Evelyn said. "The letter opened the door. Your papa chose to walk through it." Anna thought about that. "Were you scared?" Evelyn smiled sadly. "More than I admitted." "What made you tell him?" Evelyn looked down at the envelope. "He was already leaving," she said. "And I learned that morning there is no perfect time to tell the truth. There is only the last moment before silence costs too much." Silas looked up from the bridle. Their eyes met across the parlor, and the years between them seemed to fold gently into that one morning. The saddled horse, the cold wind, the old letter, the fear, the choice. Anna leaned against her mother's knee. "Did you ever keep secrets again?" Evelyn brushed a hand over her daughter's hair. "Small ones, birthday ribbons, Christmas peppermint, where your father hides the good coffee." Silas cleared his throat. "A man is entitled to one private shelf." "But not the kind that makes love lonely," Evelyn said. Silas's smile softened. "No, not that kind." Outside, evening settled over Willow Creek Ranch. Horses moved in the near pasture, their shapes dark against the amber light. Promise stood by the fence, older now but still bright-eyed, watching the house as if waiting for someone to come out and speak kindly to him. Evelyn placed Jonah's letter back in the box. Beside it, she laid Silas's blue ribbon and the deed to the ranch they had saved together. Then she closed the lid. Willow Creek had not been saved by money alone. It had not been saved by pride, fear, or a dead man's wishes. It had been saved by work, by neighbors, by courage, by forgiveness given slowly, and by two wounded hearts finally brave enough to speak before the road took one of them away. So if this story stayed with you, tell me in the comments what truth you think Evelyn needed most that morning, the truth in her father's letter, or the truth she finally found the courage to say herself. And if you want more stories where love, pain, and justice meet on the frontier, subscribe and ride with us again. The last light touched the windows of the ranch house, turning them gold. Inside, Silas reached across the table and took Evelyn's hand like a man who had once been leaving, but had spent the rest of his life coming home.